Hey guys, this is the Impossible Blog, and this is Taylor speaking. If you managed to get over here through my personality database channel, or you just came across this in the algorithm on YouTube, then welcome. I'm happy to have you here. So yeah, I guess this video is going to be about sort of challenging the perception you might have about INTJs as a personality type. And I figured the best way to do that is to go against the grain a little bit, and instead of hiding behind a really professional production, I try to give a bit more anecdotal evidence or examples as to what being an INTJ is really like. And I guess to give a bit of background to myself as a person, I am 26 years old, turning 27 in a couple of months, so I'm not a teenager. I look like one, but I'm a little bit older than that. And I just graduated university this year, and I'm hopefully going to be teaching on the JET program in the next year or so. And after that, I'm hoping to get my master's degree and work as a intelligence analyst for some sort of NGO or any place that will be willing to take me, at least. So the future is looking bright, at least for me, and I just wanted to spend a bit more time on my hobby, which is typology. And this video and this channel in particular is going to be just a means of which I can sort of help bring people to understand INTJs a bit better, because I feel like that most of the consensus governing INTJs is that there's some sort of like Thomas Shelby intellectual big daddy dom, right? That people just want to get stepped on. And well, I'll step on you for a couple dollars. I'm always looking for quick cash, but in real life, we're not like that, I'd argue at all. And I guess to give a bit more background, I have been typed as an INTJ by Harry Murrell and Joyce Meng, amongst other typologists, and I've been studying typology as a hobby for about 7 years now. I think ever since I graduated in 2016. But yeah, so it's been a while. Now, maybe I can give a bit more insight onto this personality type that many people might not have considered before. And even if I'm super nervous on camera and awkward, have crazy looking hair, that maybe I can help out in this regard. So I guess to start, I would summarize what are INTJs exactly, personality type wise. Well, they are governed by 4 core functions, and if you look into shadow functions or the 8-function model like I do, it would be 8. So they first operate with NI, TE, FI, and SE. And the first thing I would like to highlight is that they aren't TE dominants. They are NI. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. They are NI dominants. So people that typecast INTJs as these like entrepreneurial go-getters that constantly seek out status and high value items and stuff like that. That's not what INTJs are at all. They are NI dominants first and foremost. They seek to condense information or sensory activities, inferior SE, into a singular condensed framework which they can perceive the world. They are perceiving types first and foremost. Right? So, and how I like to engage with this is with functions in particular. I try to adhere more closely to traditional definitions of introversion and extroversion. Introversion and extroversion with Jung weren't so much describing, I like to spend time on my own, or I like to be around people, like social extroversion typically does. What behavioral or cognitive introversion and extroversion try to explain is just how, in what direction energy travels, right? So with introverts, the energy begins from within then expels outwards. With extroverts, they gather information from the outside world and then internalize it. And then they determine that their next steps in that environment through their introverted functions. So for INTJs, this would mean they perceive the world foremost with NI-FI first, and then they seek to engage with the world with TE-SE through their NI-FI lens. With another introverted type such as ISFJs, they perceive the world first with SITI, and then they engage with the outside world through FENE through their SITI lens. With extroverts, it would be the opposite. Say with ESTJs, they would engage with the world through TENE, and then they filter information inwards through their SIFI. ENFPs, NETE, bring that information in with FISI. You can do this with all the types. So to understand, don't know where that came from, excuse me. To understand INTJs as a type, you need to first analyze NI-FI. That's how we first see the world, and that's how we interact with the world through that NI-FI lens. So to begin, introverted intuition is about gathering sensory data, SE, and injecting an abstract meaning onto that activity. And then NI, or at least dominant NI, seeks to gather as much sensory information as it can with the meaning behind it, and then choosing which activities it wants to bring into that NI framework. Then INTJs use FI to relate themselves onto that condensed idea. And the combination of NI-FI means that INTJs, far from just being status-seeking people, they are more so focused on self-transformation and self-actualization instead of seeking status or influence, I guess for a better word. Then they interacted with the outside world through TE-SE. TE is just focused on manifesting and utilizing pre-existing systems to its benefit, right? So with TE in an auxiliary position, in a reflexive position, it largely just operates in the background without us thinking. We don't have to dedicate too much time or energy on it. It just operates on its own. An inferior SE, or just the SE with TE-SE, it just seeks to seek out experiences and activities that will grant us that will give us the meaning that we look for in our future selves. And I guess to give a personal example to how NI-FI works, at least for me, I see an ideal future perception of myself almost at every minute. And that future self embodies all the types, or not all the types, all the traits that I deem valuable in a person. They are the traits I want to see in myself as I get older. And to achieve those traits, I then choose activities that will impart that meaning that I wish to integrate into myself. Or if I'm already engaged in an activity, I have to find some way to relate that activity, to find some meaning in what I'm doing, and how that ties into who I want to be in the future. So I come up with a few examples that will help demonstrate what I mean by this a bit better. So a few years ago, I was a Muay Thai martial artist. I loved kickboxing and I got pretty good at it. The reason I wanted to go into martial arts was because I wanted to learn discipline, perseverance in the face of adversity. I wanted to become tougher, in a sense. So NI-FI is the meaning and how I relate onto that meaning. I want to teach myself discipline, perseverance, etc. And then inferior SE seeks sensory experience or activity that will impart me that desired outcome. And in this case, it was martial arts. Discipline, perseverance, and how I want that into my own identity. That's NI-FI. Inferior SE is engaging with martial arts. Example number 2 would be I want to experience the world and learn about other cultures and how they interpret life. And then maybe I can sort of integrate those interpretations into my own life and my own identity. So to do that, I actually applied for the JET program next year. I hope to be teaching in Japan by the end of 2025, and hopefully that will help me sort of just examine how other people live, and maybe they can do things better than I can, and then maybe I can integrate that into my future self. So in this example, I want to be more experienced in the world. That's NIFI. Then I seek out the JET program as a means to accomplish said goal through a specific activity. Third example, a number of years ago, I think it was 2021. This may sound crazy for an INTJ, but I wanted to become an officer in the military, the Canadian Armed Forces, and that was a goal of mine that I kept hidden from my parents. And yeah, well, hopefully my parents never watched this video, and if they do, and I guess I'm gonna have a conversation with them over dinner, which would be fun. But in this example, I want to have unique experiences. I wanted to learn how to lead and take charge in a situation and to overcome obstacles. So though that meaning would be the NIFI, and then me seeking out an experience as a military officer would be inferior SE. And yeah, so essentially NIFI is how we perceive the world and how we relate onto it. And inferior SE seeks out experiences and activities that will bring us that meaning into our future selves. So in response to people saying that inferior SE is just them, being clumsy, unskilled with the physical realm, that's not really what inferior SE is. Many different types can be clumsy or inexperienced in physical reality, right? It just depends on your experiences as a person. What inferior SE is and what distinguishes it from simple clumsiness is inferior SE is an inability to experience an activity just by itself, right? Take ESTPs and ESFPs for instance. They hate being asked, what do you hope to accomplish with what you seek out to do? For example, my younger brother is an ESFP. He's a musician. He likes to get himself involved with, concerts. He likes to throw himself into crowds. And when I ask him, okay, what do you plan to do in the future? How's whatever you're doing tie into your future goals? He gets really stressed out, right? He likes to seek out experiences first and then maybe come up with a meaning later on in life. With an I dominance in me in particular, where you tend to operate backwards from that. So to many different types, it can look weird, but that's how inferior SE is. It's an inability to see an experience for just how it is. It has to have a meaning before it jumps in. Excuse me. And you might realize that I didn't really go into detail on what auxiliary TE is. And that's because it just operates in the background to whatever I'm doing, right? It's not TE to an INTJ or to an ISTJ is not something, it's not a worldview. It's just something that keeps things running smoothly while you want to do the things that you seek to do. So for an INTJ, right, they're super focused on what they want to do and how that ties into their future selves. That TE just sort of helps to keep everything else running smoothly in your life. So you don't have to worry about or engage with it in a sense that takes more energy than it ought to do, So I guess some personal ways that TE manifests in my life is When I choose to do something, I typically establish a routine around it very quickly. And I don't often have to think about that. And when I choose to do something else, then I shift my routine onto that experience, right? So contrary to INTJs having this like super elaborate detailed master plan, we tend to have a plan for several big milestones, but then all the smaller details can be adapted, right? You can operate in the moment, right? You can keep things open to experimentation and seeing what works better. It also means I'm pretty careful with money for the most part. And at work, I often divide my time into blocks, right? So if it makes more sense to clean the store in the morning before things pick up, or does it make more sense to clean the store at night? Or does it make more sense to take out the garbage just before I clean the store? Or does it make more sense to, put store stock away before I clean the store? Right? I'm constantly juggling my work into blocks and dividing my time effectively. And I have no problem adapting that routine and schedule as long as it makes sense to me. Right? It also means I tend to keep my place, my apartment, and my workspace clean. I'm not super fixated on detail and how my environment looks. I just figure out what works, right? And for the most part, I find that keeping things clean is a lot easier than having a big mess down the road. The most important thing to realize with TE in an auxiliary position is that I am willing to adapt my strategies to new information and activities. Right? It's not a worldview. It's not something I seek to impose. It's just something I sort of cultivate and do in response to what I want to do and activities I choose. So I guess as an example of how all the core functions come into play, we'll start with NIFI. So I wanted to be educated, and I wanted to be knowledgeable about the world, to become a better citizen, a global citizen, or a citizen in my country, a citizen with my family, etc. So to achieve those ends, that's why I sought out university education in the first place. And I majored in history and a minor in English to help sort of embody that meaning and those skills into my future self. And TE operated in a way to keep everything else running smoothly in the meantime. I started a routine. I'd be at the college at a certain time. I do my work at a certain time. And eventually I decided to do my final 2 years. Instead of transferring off to University of Alberta, I decided to do my final 2 years online through Athabasca. So that way I can keep my job, I can save money through my job. And it was just the most rational thing to do to minimize the amount of student loan debt I would be working with. And it was the most rational option to mitigate that debt and keep things under control. Despite it being, lonely, potentially more difficult, because I'd have to make my schedule. I wouldn't have classmates or professors to keep my schedule in check. So it would be tougher, but TE was operating, to me, it was the most rational option. I didn't have to think about it. Just something it would make my life easier. So alongside scholarships, financial aid, and budgeting with my current job, I managed to graduate last year and pay off my student loans only a month after I graduated. So, mission success. Pretty proud of myself on that one. So that's how all the functions, the core functions, come into play. And hopefully that helps people get a better idea of INTJs, at least with the core functions. And I guess to elaborate further, we'll go into the shadow functions a bit more. They function well. So for INTJs, this would mean they have any nemesis, which The rest of this video is going to be a bit more negative on the darker side of INTJs as a personality type. The more embarrassing things that I find that most type descriptions don't tend to emphasize. So to begin with any nemesis, it means that I tend to see the worst in people. I tend to be suspicious about people's intentions, and I tend to, just stay away from people. And this is something I've really tried hard to mitigate because, as you know, perceptions aren't always reality. You're not always going to get off on the right foot with a person, but it doesn't mean that that person is a bad person. It just means that maybe you got things wrong. Maybe there's something about them that you took the wrong way. And that doesn't mean that you should completely write off a person because they made a small mistake that day. So that's what any nemesis looks like. And yeah, it's tough. It's hard to make friends, and I can be pretty picky with who I choose to associate with. And for the most part, it's made life pretty lonely. But that's something I'm working on, and something that INTJs and INFJs by extension should be aware of. TI critic is because you use TE reflexively. It's something you trust yourself inherently to do. You don't have to think about it. It's just something you do. That means TI critic is more unsure of its own insights. So I don't trust my own logical faculties all that much by comparison. I tend to rely extensively on pre-established systems, consensus, authority, and what the consensus on an idea already is. So while at times that might be the most rational way of thinking, you can often fall victim to fallacies and when you make an argument, you might be more prone to burying your argument with citations and sources without examining if those sources make sense in the confines of a logical system, right? So that means that INTJs can often fall victim to fallacies or be too reliant on positions from authority. They might be intellectually lazy. And yeah, I can attest to this. When I was younger, I'd often get into online debates with people, and I would often just, instead of doing my own thinking, I would just effectively bury my argument in citations and sources. It would just be paragraphs upon paragraphs about who said this and he said this, instead of doing my own thinking. That was when I was younger, more unhealthy, and I did my best to mitigate that as I got older. And yeah, you have to be careful. This is where TI users such as ENTPs, INTPs, but even ISFJs and ESFJs can help hold INTJs to account. And yeah, another thing you have to consider. Many people tend to assume that INTJs are very sure of their own conclusions, which can be true to a certain extent, but if you find somebody who types as INTJ, and you could find them making arguments on a whim without doing the necessary research beforehand, I would doubt they have TI critic. It's something that I'm constantly having to struggle with. So to go on to the next function, FE trickster or FE polar is my absolute favorite function to deal with. That's because it often gets me into awkward situations that could have been easily prevented if I was more socially aware. And it makes sense why INTJs and ISTJs are like this. because we're so inwardly focused and we're just so focused on our internal world that we don't often perceive how we come across to other people. This is another way to tell apart an INTJ from, say, an INTP, for instance, because INTPs have a naturally antagonistic relationship with FE. They might be caught saying that they don't care about how other people feel. They just trust the truth. They want to find the truth, and people's reactions to that are irrelevant. But by saying that, you would automatically care and you automatically perceive how other people feel. With INTJs and ISTJs, we have FE polar. We're oblivious. So I guess a pretty funny story about how FE polar can look like, or what FE polar can look like. I was coming home from work one day, and I was dirty. I came back from working at a shop, and I saw on Facebook that my friend, a close friend, lost her cat. I'm like, oh, what kind of friend would I be if I didn't even look for her cat, right? If I didn't even take the time to look. So I dropped my stuff at home and I went out without cleaning my hair or the dirt off my face. And I looked for her cat in a rail yard close to where I lived. It kind of separated from where I lived from where she lived. And yeah, I figured that would be a good place to look. Cat might be hiding in the tall grass there. So I got to work. I got on my hands and knees and I was calling out to her cat and just stumbling around the rail yard. Now, some of you might have noticed this, but I didn't. It looks kind of suspicious for a young man, pretty dirty, to be on his hands and knees through the grass in a rail yard where trains and businesses operate. So the next thing I knew, I saw a cop car pull up to me, and the cop got out of the car and asked me what I was doing. Well, I told the police officer the truth, and I told him that I was looking for my friend's cat, and unsurprisingly, they didn't believe my story. Next thing I knew, I had my hands cuffed, and I was leaned against the police car in front of a whole line of traffic, where, of course, everyone in their cars is watching an honors student getting detained by the cops. And yeah, they didn't believe my story. And I don't blame them for not believing my story. Apparently there was a robbery nearby and I looked like the suspect, and me being dirty and hands and knees in the rail yard in the tall grass didn't really help my story. Luckily for me, they quickly realized I was innocent. I was just an idiot in the grass, and I managed to get the police involved in the hunt for my friend's cat. And one of the most awkward feelings of my entire life, and that was just because I didn't really take into account how other people perceived me. So yeah, that was an interesting story. When my friend asked how I got the cops involved looking for a cat, let's just say I didn't care to elaborate too much on the story. So the final function I would like to go over is SI demon. Basically, everything you do and everything you feel, your body keeps a tally of how that affects your body. I am terrible at explaining this. But I guess I'm so inwardly focused. I just focus on what I want to do and how it ties into who I want to be in the future, that I kind of don't listen to how my body reacts to what I choose to do. This is hard for me to explain, so I'll give 2 examples of how this can manifest. So for a more physical explanation or a more physical example, I used to work as a shop hand, as I said, and my route to work, I don't walk, so I had to walk through an open field. And as you might have guessed, northern Canada can get very cold during the winter. And the day I walked to work that day it was minus 30 with the wind chill. And there was no cover on that field, but I had to cross it to get to work at a quick time. So after I got off the bus, after university, classes were concluded, I forgot my toque in my locker. And I didn't want to ask for anyone for help to give me a lift because, look, I don't drive, but I'm not going to make it everyone else's problem that I don't drive. I'll get to work on my own. So I made the trek myself. You might say it's stupid to go without any sort of protection for your ears or anything like that. It's something I considered, but something I said, you know what, that's not important. What's more important to me is being true to who I am and how I want to be self-reliant. Unsurprisingly, a passerby passed by me on the side of the road, and I was still on my feet, but it was difficult to walk. The cold was just too much. She dropped me off at my job. I thanked her and I got inside, and my coworker realized that my right ear is completely frozen solid. So I went to the washroom. I'm like, okay, well, I guess if it puffs up, turns red, I keep the ear. If it turns black, I'll have to go to the hospital and get it cut off. Some of you might say, oh, that's that was really stupid of me, and you should care more about your body, but I don't. Even as I was faced with losing my ear, I didn't care so much. To me, it was more important that I got to work without any assistance from my coworkers, because I want them to see me as a person who is true to his ideals and can rely on himself. As you can see, I still have my ear, so I didn't end up losing it. I just had to bandage it up for a couple weeks. But that's how SI demon can manifest in a more physical sense. In a more emotional sense, because if you suppress your emotions, your body does take that into account. When I was doing my final 2 years university, I knew that those final 2 years online would be very lonely. And I decided to go through it with it anyways because my body wasn't going to tell me what to do. And it was those 2 years they were very lonely. But I just pushed forward. I kept those emotions bottled up inside. I went to the college, did my work, went home. Rinse, repeat. On my own, I read my textbooks, I did all my work, I barely interacted with my professors, and I got through it. But there were some nights where I would just get home, I wouldn't feel anything. And then I would just sit down and honestly just, not easy to admit this, but, burst into tears. I'd just start crying. Because it would just get lonely. And I would just bottle up inside until my body would react against my will. Even when I got my degree earlier this year, most people feel really proud and accomplished, but I didn't really feel anything. I got my degree and then I just focused on what I wanted to do next. And yeah, so it's just those moments that were SI, despite me not valuing it, often having an antagonistic relationship to it, vengeful relationship. I don't like my body getting in the way of what I want to do. It can rebel sometimes. And that's how I found SI demon sort of playing into my life. So I guess those, with all the functions covered, I guess this concludes the video. Hopefully this video gives people a bit more insight into the INTJ personality type and how it can be quite different than what people might look at them as when examining online type descriptions. So yeah, as this video was super nerve-wracking for me to make. So if I looked nervous or unfocused, I apologize. And yeah, hopefully if you guys like it, leave a like and leave a comment below. I want to hear your ideas for potential future videos if you have any questions, or if you just want to see how, like, more anecdotes about my personal life. I'm more than happy and pretty enthusiastic to give my thoughts and opinions, and hopefully this can help dispel stereotypes about INTJs. So with that, thank you for watching, and hopefully see you again. See you then. Bye.